Did Newcastle prove they can dominate a game without Alexander Isak? Or that we can't win without him? In this 0-0 draw, Newcastle looked completely different to the side that collapsed at Villa Park last season. But there is one weakness that cost Newcastle the 3 points, and it's not to do with their lack of a striker. We'll explore how Anthony Elanga showed flashes of why Newcastle spent £55 million, what Newcastle learned from last season's nightmare performance, and the one thing that Newcastle must improve if we're going to push for a Champions League place again. But let's start with the new signing that impressed on his debut. Now, the exciting skill that Anthony Elanga brings is that pure 1v1 ability, and it was on show against Aston Villa. Luca Dean had a nightmare afternoon against Anthony Elanga, and it's down to that pure 1v1 ability, that acceleration, that timing of the shift, and you can see from this example, early on in the game, he squares him up 1v1, and look at the lack of cover around Luca Dean. Aston Villa did not help the left back early on in this game, and as Anthony Elanga progresses with the ball, he just skips by him. Luca Dean has to bring him down to stop him progressing even further, but it just didn't stop there. And a few minutes later, again, squared up 1v1 with Luca Dean, no support around Dean at all. Again, approaching Anthony Elanga, square on, overcommittal, and Anthony Elanga just breezes past him. Like he's not even there, and he ends up progressing all the way to the edge of the box. And if you've watched my previous video analysing Anthony Elanga's transfer to Newcastle, one of the most underrated qualities he brings is that ability to create, especially in the central areas, and he just suits our style of play so well, especially on transition. And that's how we caught out Aston Villa for the red card. Now, Matty Cash puts in a terrible cross. It should be to the middle of the 6-yard box, but it ends up on the edge of the box. But there's something deeper in terms of that problem for Aston Villa. Look at the two centre midfielders of Onana and Kamara. You know, there's that term in football, it's called rest defence. And that is, what are your positions on the pitch when you're in possession of the ball to help deal with potential counter-attacks? And it's just so poor from Kamara and Onana. Onana seems like he's allowed to drift into the box and be an aerial threat, but that means Kamara should be on the edge of that box in a supporting position, just be ready to deal with play. But the cross from Cash ends up at Anthony Elanga, and this is where he thrives. On the edge of the box, driving in transition, just using his pace to accelerate away and quicken up the attack. Anthony Gordon just drifts to the outside of Konza, makes a lovely darting run with pace in behind the Aston Villa back line. But it's that ability to pass the ball in behind, which is underrated from Anthony Elanga. Now, the easy pass to make here is on the outside of Anthony Gordon, allowing to be 1v1 with Konza down that left wing and take him on. But instead, he finds the most threatening ball through the heart of the defence, forces Gordon inside, and it's a lovely ball in between the Aston Villa centre-backs. Anthony Gordon taken down by Konza, but it's all down to the work of Anthony Elanga to carry that ball forward and play the most threatening ball in that situation. But there's still areas that Anthony Elanga needs to improve, and also areas where Newcastle need to learn his game. We'll start with the former, and in this situation here, it's that 1v1 opportunity early on in the game that just has to be taken by Anthony Elanga. Again, Tonali progressing with the ball on transition, and Anthony Elanga just makes a beautiful run in between that left back and centre back spot. Aston Villa keeping that high line that most teams like to do in the Premier League, but it just totally catches Luca Dean out. Like I said earlier, Luca Dean just struggled all game with Anthony Elanga. He tries to make that last ditch tackle rather than going with the run, and Anthony Elanga is through on goal. And in this situation here, he should just be driving directly through the center of that pitch, maybe open up a tiny bit of an angle to that right-hand side so he can make a bit more of an angle for the shooting opportunity. But instead, there's a key touch here in this moment that just puts him off totally. And he takes another right-footed touch and it sends him too wide. But he still has enough of an angle to drive this into that bottom left-hand corner, but he shoots it straight at the keeper. But as the season progresses, this is the kind of situation that as he gets match sharpness, he'll become more clinical, more efficient, and under the coaching of Eddie Howe, hopefully get a few more goals under his belt. He also has to improve that decision-making and when to take on a player. And in this situation, Kieran Trippier is looking to combine with Anthony Elanga, create an option on the outside so that it draws one of the two Aston Villa players away. It's 2v2 at the moment and he needs a bit of help. But what he does instead is he starts to drive at the two players. Just accelerates away from Trippier, leaving him behind him, not able to combine and create with each other. And he just drives into the two players. It's just not the best decision making, trying to take on two players at once when he had the overlapping Trippier that could have taken a player away and it opened up a 1v1 opportunity with Tielemans. But there's also situations where the players around Anthony Elanga have to learn his game. And in this situation here, Kieran Trippier is progressing with the ball. Anthony Elanga realises what's happening. There's a chance to be played in behind. He gets onto the blind side of Luca Dean, who he knows can't get out to Kieran Trippier. He would leave a vacant space in behind him to be exploited. But as Kieran Trippier progresses with the ball, he just doesn't look up or even think about playing this pass in behind when Anthony Elanga makes that dart. You can see Anthony Elanga, arms out, he knows he hasn't been played in, and these are the kinds of situations that whether it's Trippier or Tino Livramento have to learn how to get the best out of Anthony Elanga. But it wasn't just Anthony Elanga's performance that helped Newcastle dominate this game. They tweaked something from last season that helped them control Aston Villa when they were in possession of the ball. When the goalkeeper had the ball, that's when they tweaked their shape when out of possession. Anthony Elanga moved in from that right wing position alongside Anthony Gordon to create a sort of 3-2 shape high in Aston Villa's half, forcing Aston Villa to play down that left hand side in an attempt to trap them down those wide channels. And as Bizzo plays that ball out to Luca Dean, you can see the first person to press is Kieran Trippier, allowed to push up from that right back position and lock Aston Villa. As he gets up to Luca Dean, you can see Bruno steps up to Onana in the double pivot. And then Anthony Elanga closes off the ball back to the goalkeeper and he's ready to press Mings if that ball is passed back to him. And when the high press didn't work, Newcastle were happy to drop into a deep to mid block and not going out to press Aston Villa on the ball. Instead, they had that tight midfield unit. Those 5 players just restricting Aston Villa from going through the middle of the pitch and trying to find those narrow attacking midfielders like Tielemans, Rodgers, McGinn, who had moved into that central position to try and progress with the ball. As Konsa has this ball, look at the distances between Tonali and that back line. It's not just the distance between the midfield unit, it's the distance between the midfield unit and the defenders that make them such a difficult team to break down. Look how well Tonali is screening that ball into Watkins. Look how well Joelinton is screening that ball into Tielemans. And combined, look how they're restricting that space through the centre of the pitch. And as soon as Konsa's options are restricted, that's when Joelinton goes out to press the ball. Last season, we were doing it a bit too early, and that just allowed a channel to open up into those attacking midfielders, and it carried on as that ball progressed to the other side. Newcastle shifting across well, Tonali and Bruno this time, screening that pass into Morgan Rodgers and Yuri Tielemans, but this time, Aston Villa tried to penetrate with a pass. But again, because of the distances between that midfield and defensive unit, look how quickly Fabian Schär reacts. Just snaps onto the ball and wins a free kick for Newcastle. And it was just a perfect mid to deep block from Newcastle United on the day. Aston Villa definitely missed the distribution from Martinez from goal kicks and in possession. They were also very sloppy in possession. And I think that comes from it being the first game. But Newcastle just looked fitter, sharper, just ready to play this game compared to Aston Villa. And you can see that from the stats. Aston Villa had 0 shots on target with 11 men in that first half and a total XG of 0.13 from that game. It was just a game where Newcastle restricted Aston Villa to very little and Newcastle dominated the majority of the game. But even though we dominated the game, we could not find that winning goal. And yes, a striker would have helped. But there's still another key problem that Newcastle have that was present last season, and that is breaking down low blocks. The likes of Man City, Liverpool, Arsenal face low blocks on a regular basis. And yes, you need that individual quality throughout your squad to win those 1v1 duels or create those openings that other players just can't do. But there's an element of tactics to it. How you overload a team, how you create different combinations, and a variety of play in possession of the ball that Eddie Howe needs to develop as the season progresses. Now, when Aston Villa went down to 10 men, I was more confident that they wouldn't score. But I wasn't more confident that Newcastle would get that winning goal. And it's because of situations like this. In that wide area, Aston Villa have dropped so deep into that back line, and it's tricky to play against 10 men. But that's where you need to have a bit of variety to your game. It's Livramento, Bruno and Harvey Barnes down that left-hand side. Bruno pulls into the deeper position to create an option. Tino Livramento makes that run into the channel purely to take away Matty Cash and leave Barnes 1v1. And they create a nice little triangle. But again, it's what they do once they get into this situation. Harvey Barnes makes a pass and runs inside, again to take away Aston Villa and create a bit of chaos, but it just doesn't work. Because all that does is it leaves Tino Livramento 1v1 and no real support around him beside Bruno Guimaraes. Tino Livramento plays the ball into Bruno. Bruno plays it out wide to Fabian Schär. It goes down the other side to Trippier, and it's the same situation. The exact same situation on that right-hand side. Jacob Murphy, Lewis Miley, all in the same line. We currently don't have that ability to play in those central areas, draw out the opposition midfield, and then play out wide and create combinations. It feels like we play around the block a little too much. We don't have that player that can just drop himself in between that midfield and defensive line. Someone like El Khanous, who's been strongly linked over the past couple of weeks. We've got Jacob Ramsey coming in, who I think can do a job in that third midfielder role and maybe float a little bit in between that midfield and defensive line. But even though we could have done something a little different tactically, we still miss that striker. Someone that can put the ball away. Anthony Elanga had that chance in the first half. And then you've got the likes of Harvey Barnes in this situation, 87th minute, a little cutback from Gordon. He had all the time in the world to shape up for this shot and skied it over the bar. Anthony Gordon again isn't a striker. Early on in that first half, Harvey Barnes crossing the ball into the box, beautiful in-swinger. Anthony Gordon makes a lovely run, but the timing of his jump is off. It might seem like a tricky header, but it's because he's not used to being in this type of situation. Someone that's more of a striker would have timed the jump a bit better, but he just skies it over the bar again. And it's these types of situations that we just need a striker for. And I think the likes of Johan Wissa coming in, who I will be making a video on, hopefully next week, if he comes. That's the type of striker, that penalty box poacher, that would have been so good in this game against Aston Villa. And what I'm going to do now is a little quick fire round, highlighting interesting situations and performances from certain players in the game. And I have to start with Dan Burn and Fabian Schär. Both put in such good performances against Villa yesterday, and it's even more impressive for someone like Fabian Schär, who had a nightmare performance against Ollie Watkins last season, and they both stepped up to the plate in the first game of the season. And that's what competition for places does. With Malik Chow coming in, everyone in that centre-back pool needs to step up their game to keep their place in the team. Now, there's something that we kind of saw last season, but it was so obviously coached in this first game of the season, and that is overloading the back post on crosses. In that example from Gordon's header, it's Bruno, Gordon and Elanga attacking that central to back post area, not really going towards that near post. And then again, later on in that first half, as Elanga cuts in with the ball, this time it's Joelinton, Gordon and Harvey Barnes attacking that centre to back post area. And I think we'll get quite a few goals from this type of situation this season. What do we do with William Asula? When we have no striker currently in the squad, not only does he not get to start, he only got the final 5 minutes of the game. If we don't want to play him, I think we have to loan him out, especially when we get a couple strikers in, give him that game time. But I think even in that little cameo, he made a lovely little channel run, cutting in from that right side and having a lovely strike with his left foot that was well blocked. And that's the type of situation that happens when you have someone that plays striker. Even though he doesn't do it perfectly, he should be getting more minutes. And I think if he's not going to do that, then I think Eddie Howe should loan him out to get a good amount of game time this season. And Jacob Ramsey looks like he's going to be the next confirmed signing at Newcastle United this summer. And I think it's such a good transfer. So young, homegrown, fits the quota, but then there's a technical ability that he brings, especially in that left centre midfield position to rotate with Joelinton, depending on the game that we play. But he has a lovely carrying ability, can play off both feet, good finisher in and around the box, and I think he'll be a big asset for us this season. And with all the talk about Alexander Isak leaving and the pundits writing off Newcastle before the season even begins, this was the performance that shows what Newcastle United and Eddie Howe are all about. It helps settle the fan base. It builds momentum into that huge game against Liverpool on Monday night. Can't wait to see what the atmosphere is like. Can't wait to see if we can take those 3 points from Liverpool, which will be so sweet, especially given this summer and what's been happening with Alexander Isak. And if you like this video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. I'll leave potentially the Elanga video somewhere up here if you haven't watched it. And I'll see you on the next episode of A Game of Two Halves.